Welcome back to the show, my friends. I'm your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it shared here on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your story. They want to hear your cryptid and UFO experiences. So reach out to me and let's get yours on the next episode of Uncomfortable. If you haven't yet, make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And once you had a chance to listen to an episode or two, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating or review wherever you can. That alone is the most important thing you can do to help get this out in front of more people. And with more people listening, that means more great experiences coming your way. If video is more your thing, then make sure to subscribe to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube, where you can get the video version of many shows. If that's where you choose to listen to us, please make sure to click like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you are notified with each and every new release. Take a minute and check out the Uncomfortable link tree. It's the single best place that you can find anything and everything uncomfortable all in one spot. The link for that will be in the show notes below. Tonight, I've got a crazy one for you. There's not much I can say that won't give away what this episode is about. So, if you're ready, let's just get into it. Tonight's episode isn't about legend. It isn't about folklore. And it isn't about one person telling a wild story decades later. This comes from a documented investigation that was eventually put into a book form. And the book is called Night Siege, The Northern Ohio UFO-Creature Invasion by Dennis Pilichis. Multiple witnesses, multiple nights, physical traces, law enforcement involvement, and a situation that lasted not minutes, not hours, but nearly an entire summer. This is a case that put the sleepy town of Rome Township, Ohio, on the map for a time back in 1981. A rural farming community, fields, woods, creeks, much what you would expect. Long stretches between homesteads, the kind of place where everybody knows what belongs and what doesn't. And according to the people who lived there, something moved into those woods that summer, something large, something upright, sometimes described as an animal, sometimes described as something else entirely. And whatever it was, it didn't pass through. It stayed. Rome Township sits in Ashtabula County, northeast Ohio, close to Pennsylvania, mostly farmland broke up by woods and low rolling terrain, creeks cutting through tree lines, old fence posts, outbuildings, barns. At night, it gets quiet in a way that suburban areas never do. No traffic hum, no light pollution, just wind, open air, and insects. So when something heavy moves out there, you hear it. And when something stands at the edge of a field, you see it. There's nowhere for it to hide, which is exactly why what happened here unsettled people so deeply. Because this wasn't deep wilderness. This was someone's farmland, someone's yard. According to the accounts compiled by Pilichis, the activity didn't start dramatically. It started small. Odd noises at night, movement in the woods, animals acting strangely, things that are easy to dismiss once, harder to dismiss when they repeat. Dogs hesitating to leave the porch after dark, livestock bunching up together tightly, late night disturbances around outbuildings, the feeling reported more than once that something large was walking the perimeter of the property. Not running, not crashing, walking. Slow, deliberate, measured steps. Heavy enough to be clearly heard from inside the house. And this wasn't described as random wildlife. Witnesses repeatedly used the words like pacing, circling, watching, language that would imply intention. That's when unease would start creeping in because predators pass through, right? They don't patrol. Eventually, shapes were seen, not quick flashes, not a deer bolting through brush, but stationary forms, dark, upright, near the tree line. Several witnesses described silhouettes that appeared broader and taller than any known animal in the area. Some reports estimated 6 to 7 feet tall or more, often motionless, as if observing the house. And then there were the eyes, glowing red, like hot coals, at heights that were inconsistent with deer or dog. They were not brief reflections, but steady points of light that faced the house, remaining visible, watching back. More than once, interior lights were turned off, not to see better, but out of instinct, because nobody wanted to stand in front of illuminated windows while something unknown was staring back in. Now, that's not curiosity. That's a show of vulnerability. Then came the physical evidence. There were tracks, large prints found in soft soil near the property and woods. Some showed 5 toes, broad, human-like proportions, but much larger. Others were different, 3-toed impressions, with more of a triangular pad to it, less human, difficult to attribute to known wildlife in the area. These weren't one-offs. Multiple impressions were taken and reported found across different days, different spots, near fields, near creek beds, near structures. This started suggesting a movement pattern rather than a single pass-through. And that detail, I think, matters because tracks that repeat mean something is staying in the area. The nights grew louder. The sounds got closer. Footsteps near the house itself, movements around the barn, sounds near windows. Witnesses described breathing or shuffling near the walls. The sense that whatever was out there wasn't remaining at the tree line anymore. It was approaching their structures. And that psychological line between the woods and the home for the family began to blur. Sleep became difficult. Lights stayed on longer. People listened more carefully. Every sound mattered because now it felt like a personal attack. Then came the part that changed the tone of this experience entirely. There were dead animals. Accounts described livestock or smaller animals found deceased under unusual circumstances, injuries that witnesses felt didn't resemble normal predator attacks, not typical scavenging, not the messiness you'd expect from coyotes or dogs. In some cases, the remains appeared oddly selective or unexplained. The kinds of details that get labeled mutilations. Now, whether every one of those deaths were truly anomalous is impossible to prove this long after. But what matters is this. The people who found them believed that something abnormal had occurred. And that belief dramatically increased their fear. Because strange sounds are one thing. Dead animals are another. It began to feel tangible, physical. Evidence that something isn't just watching, it's interacting. And apparently this wasn't confined to just one household. Neighbors began reporting things too. Lights in the sky, large shapes crossing roads late at night, movement near Rock Creek, strange calls or vocalizations from the woods. So what's the important part? These reports came from different people, independent, not standing together, influencing each other, yet describing similar shapes, similar sizes, similar behavior. When separate witnesses start telling the same story, that's when investigators pay attention. For the most part, this activity took place in Rome, but it wasn't only on one farm. Reports extended outward towards the Rock Creek area. Again, creek beds, wood lines, fields connecting properties, natural travel corridors. If something large was moving through that region, those waterways would have been one of the easiest routes. Residents there described nocturnal movement, large forms near the tree lines, unusual sounds, and continued sightings over multiple nights, which suggests this wasn't a single point event. It was regional. Something moving through a broader territory. And this is where the story shifts, because up to now, you could still argue wildlife, misidentification, fear was amping things up, but what happened next pulls the case into high strangeness territory, because witnesses didn't just report creatures. They also began reporting lights, objects in the sky, and events that didn't fit purely a biological explanation. That's when the siege stopped feeling like a Bigfoot case and started feeling like something else entirely. The family in Rome wasn't just reporting strange things anymore. They weren't peeking through curtains. They weren't speculating. They were climbing onto the roof of their own home at night with rifles, because whatever was out there wasn't leaving. And that's where the story stops feeling like a sighting and starts feeling more like an ominous pressure, like a sustained presence in that area, like something was sharing their property. One detail Pilichis emphasized repeatedly in interviews and documentation was there was an emotional shift. At first, the family tried to rationalize wildlife, hunters, loose livestock, anything normal. But when the disturbances happened again the next night, and again, and again, the brain stops offering comfortable explanations, and something else creeps in. Anticipation. Not fear of a single event, but dread of nightfall itself. Because night meant activity. Night meant having to listen. Night meant hearing footsteps. And eventually, night meant having to take a defensive position. And then this is where the Rome case separates itself from a typical Bigfoot sighting report, because this wasn't one quick glimpse. There were organized watches, deliberate observation, people intentionally staying awake, positioning themselves where they could see the fields and tree lines clearly, many times on the roof, sometimes near outbuildings, sometimes watching from windows with the lights off. Not casually looking, but actively scanning, waiting. And multiple times, movement was detected exactly where they expected, near the tree lines, along the fence rows, on the edges of the field. Not random wandering, but more of a perimeter type behavior, as if something was staying just outside of comfortable visibility. Close enough to observe, far enough to remain difficult to identify, which is a behavior pattern investigators found troubling, because predators don't normally linger. They hunt, and they leave. This looked more like surveillance. The rooftop incidents deserve deeper attention, because they weren't one-time panic responses. They reportedly happened multiple nights. The family didn't fire blindly into the woods. They described shooting specifically toward visible figures or movement in open areas, targets that should have reacted dramatically if they were ordinary animals. Gunfire can be deafening in open farmland. Even a warning shot can send deer sprinting for 100 yards. Coyotes would scatter instantly. But according to accounts, these figures did not react the way wildlife should. There was no sudden sprinting, Instead, there was slow, deliberate movements. These creatures did not collapse into a hump on the ground. They apparently would drop to the ground and scurry off. Now, there were distress sounds, screaming when the shots would fire. But in the next days, when they would go out to visibly see if there was any trace, they found no blood, no tissue. Many times the reaction of the creatures was just a slow, deliberate withdrawal with minimal movement, almost as if they were indifferent, unaffected. And that detail stuck with the witnesses for years afterwards because it broke expectations. When reality stops behaving the way you know it should, that's when fear begins to deepen. Not because something attacks you, but because you can't predict when it will attack you. And unpredictability is what truly unsettles people. Another reason the Rome case has endured for decades is this. Pilichis wasn't the only observer. Other civilian researchers and investigators came to the property. Some stayed overnight, some conducted their own watches, some independently walked the grounds looking for tracks and impressions, and found them, and casted them, and collected them. So what does that mean? There were adults present who were not part of the family, who were not emotionally invested. They were not primed by months of stress prior to getting there. And they still reported seeing lights, hearing movements, finding prints. And that matters because it reduces the single family imagination argument. You now have outside observers documenting similar things, even if they couldn't fully identify what they were seeing. They acknowledged something unusual was happening. Investigators paid particular attention to the tracks because the footprints are physical. They either exist or they don't. And what complicates the case further was consistency. The same general types of impressions appeared repeatedly. Large five-toed prints, wide stride lengths, deep impressions indicating significant weight. And then separately, three-toed prints, different shape entirely. Hard to classify zoologically for the animals in that area. Two very distinct types. Same time frame, same environment. That doesn't fit neatly into a misidentified bear or a large dog. Even today, researchers still debate what those impressions could represent. But the key point is, they were documented by more than one person across multiple days, across multiple weeks, which strongly suggests something tangible was moving through that area. Not just lights in the sky, not just imagination. Something with weight, mass, leaving marks in the soil. And then there were the aerial reports. These weren't described as distant stars or airplanes. They were described as being very low, close, sometimes hovering, sometimes moving horizontally with no sound, sometimes appearing to change direction abruptly, which witnesses noted because conventional aircraft don't behave that way. And what continues to make this case strange is the high strangeness overlap. Ground activity and aerial lights were reported on the same nights, not weeks apart, not separate seasons, on the same nights, sometimes within the same hour. And that creates an uncomfortable question. Are these separate phenomena actually happening coincidentally? Or are they parts of the same event? Investigators couldn't answer that, but they documented the correlation because ignoring it would have been dishonest. Geographically, the Rock Creek area becomes important here because if you look at that area on the map, the creek forms a natural travel path. Tree cover, low ground, less exposure. If a large animal or anything trying to avoid being seen were moving through the region, that's exactly the route it would take. And that's where the additional reports began to cluster. Not dramatic ones, but consistent ones. Movement, sounds, large shapes, crossing open spaces at night, which suggests a territory, a range, not a single point anomaly, but something operating across a wider landscape. That's why investigators treated this as a flap rather than an isolated sighting. Multiple locations, multiple nights, same general characteristics. And something that doesn't get talked about enough in cases like this is exhaustion. Living under weeks of unknown disturbances can change you. Sleep deprivation, constant vigilance, jumping at every noise, keeping your weapons loaded and nearby, checking windows repeatedly, checking your doors are locked. It's not thrilling. It's draining. And reading Pilichis' documentation, that's the tone that you feel. Not excitement, not sensationalism, just people wanting it to stop, which might be the most convincing part of all, because people invent stories for attention. But they don't usually invent prolonged stress that makes their own lives harder. And then, like many high strangeness cases, it didn't end dramatically. There wasn't a capture, no clear explanation was given, no official report. The activity simply diminished. There began to be less movement, fewer sightings, and eventually everything was quiet again, as if whatever had been moving through the area had just moved on, which might be the most frustrating possible outcome, right? Because you're left with the memory of what had happened, but no apparent answers. You have evidence that something happened, but nothing to point to and say, that was it. That's what it was. So what do we actually have? Not myths, not campfire stories, but documented claims of repeated large figures, physical tracks, dead animals, gunfire with little apparent reaction, independent witnesses, researchers on site, and unexplained lights in the sky, all occurring within the same stretch of time, the same geography, in front of the same witnesses. Now, you don't have to jump to extraterrestrials or cryptids or anything exotic, but you also can't easily wave it away because something was there, something physical enough to leave prints, something bold enough to approach their houses, something persistent enough to make a family climb onto their own roof with loaded rifles. So whatever it was, for a few weeks through 1981, Rome Township didn't feel empty. And for those people who lived through it, that quiet farmland, I'm sure, never quite felt the same again. And maybe that lingering uncertainty is the real legacy of the night siege. If you're interested, I would highly suggest picking up a copy of Night Siege by Dennis Pilichis. Last name is spelled Pilichis. The full name of the book is Night Siege, the Northern Ohio UFO-Creature Invasion. It is a small book, only about 40 pages, I believe, but it is essentially field notes from the interviews and the investigations that took place on that family's farm. It's very interesting, very compelling. And I think, if I'm correct, I've got another episode lined up for you based on the events that took place from somebody who personally talked with Dennis Pilichis about 4 years after the events that are documented in this book. So keep your eye out for that. Should be coming up in the next week. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this story. We'll see you again.